April 7, 1945. Tokyo, Empire of Japan. Dawn spreads over the imperial capital like a rising flame as 91 North American P-51D Mustangs of the 15th and 21st Fighter Groups slice through the crystalline morning air at 25,000 feet. In the cockpit of his silver Mustang, Lieutenant Colonel James Tapp scans the horizon, his gloved hand steady on the control stick. 6 wing-mounted .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns sit ready, loaded with armor-piercing incendiary rounds. 1,880 rounds total, enough to deliver 80 rounds per second of devastating firepower. Quick pause before we continue if you love uncovering the real battles, secret tactics, and shocking reversals that shaped history. Make sure to subscribe and like this video. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how these war stories reach history fans all over the world. Every week we bring you another untold story of courage, innovation, and survival. Alright, let's get back to the front lines. Below, Mount Fuji rises from the landscape like a snow-crowned sentinel, its unmistakable silhouette serving as the visual landmark that would guide pilots through this historic mission. The morning sun casts long shadows across rice paddies, villages, and military airfields that had never before seen American single-engine fighters. The very presence of these aircraft represents something Japanese military planners had declared impossible. The mission is unprecedented. Escort B-29 superfortresses deep into the Japanese homeland from Iwo Jima, 750 miles away, a distance that military strategists just 2 years earlier had deemed absolutely impossible for single-engine fighters. At 0715 hours, more than 100 Japanese interceptors converge on the American formation. Through the morning haze comes a sight that shocks Japanese pilots to their core: single-engine American fighters over Tokyo, something their commanders had sworn could never happen. The psychological impact is immediate and devastating. These are not carrier-based Navy fighters with 200-mile combat radii. These are land-based Army Air Force fighters that have somehow crossed 750 miles of open ocean to appear over the sacred imperial capital. Leading the Japanese defense are pilots flying the Nakajima Ki-84 Hate, the Frank, Japan's fastest and most advanced fighter, alongside older Ki-43 Hayabusas, Ki-44 Toyos, Ki-61 Hents, and the Navy's A6M0s and N1K2 J Scheidenkais. The Ki-84 could outclimb and outmaneuver the P-51 at certain altitudes. Its 30mm cannons could destroy a Mustang with a single hit. What happens next will demonstrate the vast technological gulf between two nations' approaches to industrial warfare and reveal why the P-51 Mustang would be called the most perfect long-range fighter aircraft ever built. The North American P-51D Mustang had arrived in the Pacific Theater with a reputation already forged in blood over Europe, where it had broken the back of the Luftwaffe and made daylight bombing of Germany possible. Developed initially for Britain, early models were transformed when British engineers mated the airframe to the legendary Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, creating one of aviation's most successful international collaborations, a marriage of American aerodynamic genius and British power plant mastery. The Packard V1650-7 engine, a license-built version of the Rolls-Royce Merlin 66, delivered 1,695 horsepower at takeoff with water injection, rising to 1,720 horsepower in emergency war power settings. This two-stage, two-speed supercharged masterpiece could maintain devastating performance at altitudes where Japanese engines gasped for air, their single-stage superchargers unable to compress the thin atmosphere sufficiently. The P-51D achieved a maximum speed of 440 miles per hour at 25,000 feet, reached an operating ceiling of nearly 42,000 feet, and was armed with 6 wing-mounted .50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns that made it a flying arsenal. The mathematics of firepower were devastating and precisely calculated. 6M2 Brownings firing at 800 rounds per minute each meant the P-51D could deliver 4,800 rounds per minute of concentrated firepower, 80 rounds per second. Each armor-piercing incendiary round weighed 46 grams and traveled at 2,900 feet per second, delivering tremendous kinetic energy capable of penetrating aircraft armor, igniting fuel tanks, and destroying engines with just a few well-placed hits. By early 1945, American industrial capacity had reached its terrifying peak. North American Aviation's factories in Inglewood, California, and Dallas, Texas, were producing P-51s at a rate that staggered imagination. One new Mustang rolled off the assembly line every hour. Assembly lines ran 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. By war's end, 15,586 P-51s of all variants would be manufactured, with the D model alone accounting for 8,156 aircraft, more than Japan's total production of all fighter types in the last 2 years of the war combined. The very long-range capability that brought Mustangs to Tokyo represented a revolution in fighter operations. With dual 110-gallon drop tanks, Mustangs could fly round trips of 1,500 statute miles as a matter of routine, equivalent to flying from Los Angeles to Little Rock, Arkansas, entirely over water in a single-engine aircraft with no alternate landing sites except the Pacific Ocean. The key to this achievement lay in the Merlin engine's exceptional fuel efficiency at cruise settings, consuming just 65 gallons per hour at economical cruise, combined with the P-51's revolutionary laminar flow wing design that reduced drag by 35% compared to conventional airfoils. Developed by North American aerodynamicist Edgar Schmud, this wing maintained smooth airflow over a greater percentage of the surface, delaying transition to turbulent flow and dramatically reducing parasitic drag. And designated Frank by the Allies, this fighter represented Japan's desperate attempt to match American technological superiority with whatever resources remained. The Ki-84 is generally considered the best Japanese fighter to operate in significant numbers during the conflict, though significant numbers was relative. What Japan considered mass production, America would consider prototype runs. On paper, the aircraft appeared formidable, high speed, excellent maneuverability, and armament of two 30mm Ho, 155 cannons and two 20mm Ho, 5 cannons. But the 30mm cannons carried only 50 rounds per gun, the 20mm cannons just 150 rounds per gun, a total ammunition load of 400 rounds compared to the Mustang's 1,880 rounds. The Ki-84 was powered by the Nakajima Ha-45 Hamar, an 18-cylinder radial engine with fuel injection and a single-stage, 2-speed supercharger using water methanol injection for 2,000 horsepower at takeoff. Initial testing showed promise, with prototypes reaching 387 miles per hour and later claims of up to 427 miles per hour under ideal conditions with high-octane fuel and perfect engine tuning. However, the reality of late-war Japanese production told a dramatically different story, one of declining quality, desperate improvisation, and systemic collapse. Pilots in the field learned quickly that the Ki-84's high-maintenance Nakajima Hamar engine and landing gear were prone to catastrophic failure. The Hamar, while theoretically powerful, suffered from chronic reliability problems that worsened as quality control collapsed. The engine required precise tolerances that Japanese factories, under constant B-29 bombardment and lacking quality steel and aluminum, could no longer maintain. Many landing gear units buckled on landing because late-war Japanese steel contained impurities that made proper heat treatment impossible. Fuel was diluted to 80 to 87 octane instead of the 100-plus octane the engine was designed for. Oxygen systems failed at altitude. Radios were unreliable. And worst of all, Japan had almost no experienced pilots left. The first pass came at 0722 hours. Captain Saburo Sakai, one of Japan's last surviving aces with 64 confirmed kills, watched from 20,000 feet as the American formation maintained perfect spacing. Each Mustang flew precisely 200 feet from its wingman, each element perfectly staggered. No wasted movement. No individual heroics. Just cold, mathematical precision that spoke of countless training hours, standardized procedures, and pilots who trusted their machines absolutely. Sakai had flown since 1937. He had fought over China, the Philippines, Guadalcanal, and Rabaul. He had seen courage triumph over technology 100 times. Japanese pilots compensating for inferior equipment with superior spirit, with Bushido, with the willingness to die that American pilots, soft, comfort-loving Americans, supposedly lacked. But what approached Tokyo that morning wasn't about spirit. It was about physics. Sakai's wingman, Lieutenant Tanaka, was 19 years old with 40 hours of flight time. The boy had never fired his guns in combat. He'd been rushed through training because Japan no longer had time to build proper pilots. Tanaka flew a Ki-84 Hate that had rolled off the assembly line 3 weeks earlier, built by conscripted labor in a factory that had been bombed twice in the last month. Sakai keyed his radio. All aircraft, prepare to engage. Maintain altitude advantage. Do not. Static. His radio crackled and died. The vacuum tubes had failed again. Late war production meant unreliable components, inconsistent wiring, shortcuts that saved the empire a few yen per aircraft and cost pilots their lives. He switched to hand signals. Below, the Mustangs continued their inexorable advance. Their Packard-built Merlin engines purred smoothly at 25,000 feet, two-stage superchargers compressing the thin air efficiently, delivering full power where Japanese single-stage superchargers struggled. The Americans flew in the realm where physics favored them absolutely. Sakai pushed his throttle forward and dove. His Ki-84 accelerated quickly, one advantage the Hate retained, but at 380 miles per hour, the control surfaces began to stiffen. At 400 miles per hour, pulling out of the dive required both hands on the stick and every ounce of strength in his shoulders. The airframe shuddered. Rivets vibrated. Somewhere in the wing root, something groaned metallically. The Mustangs saw him coming. They didn't panic. They didn't break formation. They simply rolled inverted and dove, a standard defensive maneuver executed with parade ground precision. And they kept accelerating. At 450 miles per hour, the P-51s pulled out of their dives in gentle curves, their laminar flow wings maintaining lift, their pilots breathing normally through reliable oxygen systems, their control surfaces responding crisply. The American formation reformed 2,000 feet lower in less than 30 seconds. Sakai's dive had reached 420 miles per hour before structural concerns forced him to level off. Tanaka, less experienced, had pulled out early at 390 miles per hour, falling behind. 2 other pilots in the squadron had exceeded safe speeds. One would discover a buckled tail section after landing. The other would not land at all. His overstressed airframe would fail in the next engagement. The Americans climbed back to altitude in a leisurely spiral, their Merlins drinking high-octane fuel, their superchargers maintaining power, their pilots conversing calmly over crystal-clear radios. Bandits, 10 o'clock high. I see them. Section 3, you're clear to engage. Copy. Engaging. Coordination. Information. Teamwork enabled by technology that simply worked. Sakai tried again. He positioned himself above and ahead of a Mustang element, using the last advantage he possessed, altitude. The Ki-84 could outclimb the P-51 at certain speeds. If he could force them into a turning fight at lower altitudes where his lighter airframe gave him an edge. The Mustangs didn't turn. They dove again, accelerating past 460 miles per hour, then executed a zoom climb that carried them back to 27,000 feet, higher than before. The vertical energy management was flawless. They converted speed to altitude, altitude back to speed, maintaining the initiative through pure energy physics. Sakai's engine coughed. The fuel mixture was wrong, too lean. The 87-octane gasoline his hate burned was 50 points below what the Nakajima Hamar engine was designed for. The engine had been optimized for 100-octane fuel that Japan could no longer produce. Running on inferior fuel meant reduced power, increased engine temperatures, and detonation that slowly destroyed cylinder heads. His oxygen system hissed irregularly. At 24,000 feet, hypoxia was becoming a factor. His vision narrowed slightly. His reaction time slowed by microseconds that would matter in combat. Lieutenant Tanaka's Ki-84 fell out of formation, trailing smoke. He'd pushed his engine too hard, and something internal had failed. A piston ring, perhaps, or a cylinder head cracked by poor-quality steel. The boy managed to glide toward an emergency airstrip, his 19 years ending not in glory, but in mechanical failure. The Americans noticed, but didn't pursue. They had a mission. They maintained formation. Sakai's ammunition counter read 50 rounds for each 30mm cannon, 150 rounds for each 20mm cannon. A total of 400 rounds. He could fire his 30mm cannons for exactly 3.75 seconds before they ran dry. His 20mm cannons would last 11 seconds. Every shot had to count because there was no margin for error, no second chance, no spray-and-pray tactics. Each Mustang carried 1,880 rounds, enough for 23.5 seconds of continuous fire from all 6 guns, or nearly 2 minutes if fired in controlled bursts. They could afford to miss. They could afford to saturate an area with lead. They could afford to learn from their mistakes because they had ammunition to spare. Below, another Ki-84 attempted a head-on pass, the samurai approach, courage against courage. The Mustang's 6.50 caliber machine guns opened fire at 800 yards. 80 rounds per second converged on the Ki-84's engine cowling. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds punched through aluminum, ignited fuel lines, shattered the Homare's already fragile cylinders. The Ki-84 disintegrated in midair. The Mustang didn't even adjust course. It flew through the debris field and rejoined formation. Sakai understood then what he'd been denying since the Americans appeared. Bushido, the way of the warrior, meant nothing to physics. Courage couldn't make a single-stage supercharger perform like a 2-stage model. Willingness to die couldn't increase ammunition capacity. The samurai's spirit couldn't make 87-octane fuel burn like 100-octane. A younger pilot might have pressed the attack anyway, choosing death over dishonor. But Sakai had survived 8 years of war by understanding when to fight and when to preserve forces for battles that could be won. He signaled the remaining pilots, those whose radios still functioned, those who could still see his hand signals through failing oxygen systems, and led them away from the formation. The Mustangs continued toward Tokyo. Perfect formation. Perfect discipline. Perfect machines flown by adequately trained pilots who trusted American engineering more than Japanese pilots could trust their own aircraft. Behind them, Sakai counted his losses. 4 Ki-84s destroyed, 3 damaged, 1 pilot dead, 2 bailing out, and 0 American casualties. The mathematics of industrial warfare had spoken. And courage, however pure, had no answer. For 600 years, Japan's greatest defense had been the ocean itself. Mongol invasions shattered against typhoons in 1274 and 1281, divine winds that protected the sacred islands. European powers probed Japan's coasts in the 1500s but found the logistical challenge insurmountable. Even America's Admiral Perry required a fleet and months of preparation just to anchor in Tokyo Bay. Distance had always saved Japan. Until April 7, 1945. Admiral Takejiro Onishi stood in the underground command bunker beneath Tokyo, staring at the plotting board with the expression of a man watching his religion collapse. Red markers showed American fighter positions, single-engine fighters, over the imperial capital. The distance from Iwo Jima to Tokyo was clearly marked, 660 nautical miles. Impossible, he whispered, though the evidence screamed from every radar station, every visual spotter, every terrified pilot report flooding the communication lines. His intelligence officers had calculated it months ago. Single-engine fighters had combat radii of 400 miles at most. The Americans would need carriers positioned dangerously close to the home islands, carriers that Japanese submarines and kamikazes could attack. Geography still protected Japan. Mathematics still favored the defense. But American engineers had rewritten the mathematics. The P-51 Mustang carried 269 gallons of internal fuel. Add 2 110-gallon drop tanks, and the total. At Tachikawa Air Base, maintenance crews stopped working and stared upward. Ground personnel who'd believed the propaganda about American industrial weakness now watched formations so precise they seemed painted on the sky. Advanced radios allowed the Mustangs to coordinate effortlessly. Superior training showed in every maneuver. Reliable engines meant no stragglers, no emergency landings, no mechanical failures leaving pilots vulnerable. The contrast with Japan's desperate situation was crushing. Even veteran pilots felt it. Captain Takashi Nakamura, 42 kills, 3 years of combat experience, realized with sickening clarity that Japan had already lost.
Not today.
Not in this battle. The war had been lost the moment American industry mobilized fully, the moment technology replaced courage as the dominant factor in warfare. He'd survived this long by being honest about tactical situations. Today's tactical situation was hopeless. Strategic situation, worse. Japan was fighting an enemy that could project power across 1,500 miles of ocean as casually as Japan once projected power across the 100 miles to Korea. Below, in the streets of Tokyo, civilians watched the contrails and understood what military propaganda could no longer conceal. The divine wind would not save them. Geography would not save them. Courage would not save them. The Americans had come to Tokyo. And nothing would stop them from coming back tomorrow. Morale didn't crack. It shattered. From flight school cadets to staff officers, from factory workers to veteran aces, the same terrible realization spread like poison. Japan's war was already over. Only the dying remained.